Hello and welcome to Adoptee Conversations from the Adoption and Fostering Podcast. In this new series, we're inviting adoptees to share their perspectives and views on all things adoption. We've no agenda and we're looking to have an open, frank conversation. In this, the first episode, I chat to Courtney from the United States, and she shares her views and perspectives on adoption as well as parts of her story. Please note, Courtney is open and honest about the impact of adoption on her and how this manifests in her life from a young age. Some of the details of this may be upsetting for listeners who have experience of adoption from whatever perspective, so we do advise caution. If there's any doubt, then give it a pass or ask a friend to listen to screen it for you. If you'd like to know more or have any questions for Courtney, her Twitter handle is @WordyRamblings and she'd be more than happy to answer questions. We hope you find it interesting, and if you're an adoptee and would like to share your perspectives or experience, then please do direct messages on our Twitter feed or our Facebook page. I'd like to welcome Courtney to the podcast. Hello Courtney, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. You very kindly offered to come on and kind of share your views on contemporary adoption, but also maybe share a bit of your story. So, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Okay. So, as you said, I'm Courtney, and I am an adult adoptee that lives in the U.S. I was adopted from Canada as an infant. My adoption is a private gray market adoption from when Canada still sealed and closed all of their records. So some of my stuff is a bit different than even contemporary adoptions could be in Canada, for example, right now, or in the US or in the UK. They unsealed the records in 2009, so I have my gently too heavily redacted packet and my original birth certificate, and then I did DNA and am in partial reunion with my original family.
Wow. I mean, for some of that to a UK audience, even the idea of sealed records and sort of across country is really quite unusual. Because the state that you're in, is that still, with it being cross country, does that mean that you don't have access, or explain that to us? Because I'm not up to speed. So
I was born in Canada, and the adoption, mine's a little odd because, like I said, it was also a private gray market adoption, which it's not like legal where I live to do it that way, but
right.
I'm here anyways because that's what kind they did. So in Canada at the time, it may have been frowned upon, but wasn't technically illegal to do a gray market adoption. So my adoption only took place in Canada. I had a Canadian birth certificate. Everything was done in Canada, and then they crossed the border with me and presented as if they gave birth in Canada, which is how I got here.
Right. So that's interesting.
I don't recommend doing that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Wow, there's some interesting stuff to unpick there. Wow. So can I ask how old you were when that happened?
Okay, I was not quite a year old when I came to the United States. I was born in August of 81, and then the adoption took place in March of 82.
Right.
And so I was about 6 months old.
So that's even before your 6 months. That's really complicated.
It was a lot. So, but I was along for the ride, I suppose, because I was an infant, so
yeah,
couldn't be like, I don't really want to do all that. But yeah, so that was just kind of how all of that shook out. And so then I'm in Virginia now, and I've been in Virginia since then. Almost, yeah. Right. Like 37 years in Virginia at this point. So
right, so that's a complicated start. Yeah, I mean, not all adoptions are complicated, but that is right.
That adds its own level of extra, kind of on top. Where you're like, really, was all of that necessary to do that way?
Yeah,
because it was, I guess, easier for them, but it did make it exponentially more difficult for me as I got older.
Yeah, of course. So tell me about that experience of growing up as an adoptee. Was that something that was kind of at the front of was it that in the foreground, or was it very much in the background of your life and growing up?
I wasn't really allowed to talk about being adopted. That wasn't really a thing on the table. I was adopted they were not under the impression that they could have children. So they sought adoption.
Yep.
And then she preferred the idea of just kind of pretending like it didn't happen, even though it had, and I knew it had. So that was an odd way of handling that. Then they did have a child later on. So I have a younger brother that's theirs that I grew up with. And at that point, it became clear that she kind of regretted having made the decision to adopt to begin with. Because I guess I was a mark of the failure to be a parent, and he was a success to show that she could.
Yeah.
So we just didn't talk about adoption, and I definitely was not allowed to ask questions about where I came from or who I could be related to in any way, shape, or form.
But I guess there's a positive there. Well, that's me being ever the optimist. Is the positive is that you knew you were adopted.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
So it is a positive, because had I found out I was adopted because I just sort of did a DNA test because I was curious and had all these relatives pop up, I would have been livid. Because that's a massive betrayal to someone to not tell them something like that. Yeah. So I would have been livid. So
yeah. So is that something you can remember, or was that just part of your who you were? You always knew, or was there a sit down moment?
I was 6.
Right.
When they said that I was adopted, because that's when she got pregnant.
Wow.
Pregnant with your brother. Now, you were adopted, though, so, I didn't give birth to you. Okay.
So literally dropped in.
Yeah, just like that.
Dropped into a conversation, not a sit-down preparation. Let's do some. Yeah. Wow. So what did that mean to the 6-year-old you?
I was like, just, kind of thing. And I remember I did ask, did that mean that I had different parents, and kind of how am I not hearing about this sooner? And it was, no, you don't have different parents. We're your parents. I'm like, but you just said that you didn't give birth to me, and that's obviously how babies are made, because that's how you're making that one. I'm not really sure I'm following this, but it was kind of clear at the end of that conversation I wasn't really supposed to ask questions.
Right.
Just know this is the one we're giving birth to. Didn't give birth to you, though. You're adopted, but don't ask anything about that, because they're over there and we're over here, and you don't need to know anything about that.
Just play nice.
Yep.
Wow. So looking back on that now, that must have been a sort of a seed change in your life when you up until 6, and then the kind of this total diversion for that. And obviously I'm an adopter, so I'm trying to pull out the positives of that experience and try to put a positive spin on it. But did it was that then something that changed significantly at that moment, and then you were kind of always, it was just this hovering knowledge that was not allowed to be spoken of?
It was something that was definitely there that I knew quickly was not supposed to be spoken of, because if I tried to talk about it, it turned into a big argument, and then I was in trouble. So I did associate being adopted with being in trouble, or discussing being adopted with being in trouble, as if it was somehow shameful. So I would say that that's not the best way to handle that as an adoptive parent. And if you're in kind of that zone where you're uncomfortable talking about adoption with an adoptee that you've adopted, probably shouldn't adopt, because it causes problems for the adoptee.
Yeah, anecdotally, I've got a friend who found out by accident on his 17th birthday that he was adopted, just because he wanted a birth certificate to get a driving license, and the date on his birth certificate and the names of his parents were not the same as the ones he'd grown up with, and that experience has been catastrophic across his adult life.
Right. Well, that's that. Yeah. regardless of if your parents have always treated you well and you felt loved and this was your family, something like that is a very deep betrayal because it makes everything before that a lie.
Yeah. There's no good in that, is there? You can't bring out any kind of positives.
No, but it's not shameful to be adopted, and it's not shameful to be an adoptive parent. So you shouldn't, in your own home and heart and mind, should not treat it as if it is shameful because the adoptee is going to absorb that they are the source of the shame. Yeah,
and that, I guess, children are egocentric in the sense that the world revolves around them. So if we're ashamed, it's because of me.
Yes.
I am the source of that shame. Which is just shocking, and it's just wrong. So I'm thinking about you, kind of, Courtney, growing up into kind of then moving into adolescence, teenager, with that whole thing around identity. It's kind of bubbling anyway. So how did that knowledge then kind of play out in you as a teenager, adolescent?
As it kind of progressed through, it was maybe a little unfortunate, I will say, because I didn't have an outlet to talk about it and it be okay that I was talking about it. So I first attempted suicide when I was 11 because I wanted it all to stop. It didn't work, and I'm fine now, so that's good. But I've had a lot of therapy since then, but there wasn't anywhere safe for me to talk about it except for amongst maybe two friends that were also 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. They're not. And they in their own right had their own identity struggles like everyone does when you just start to get older. But we weren't having the same struggle. We weren't on the same page with it. Because they could go home and look at their parents and know where they came from. And even if they'd been adopted, they could talk about it. So, I had one friend whose mom was adopted, and I was able to talk to her some, and I feel like that was helpful. But it wasn't actively encouraged for me to do that either.
So there's... So what did your parents, did they click, your adoptive parents, did they click that this was going on? Did they know what was this inner turmoil? Were they able to... Yes, they were aware. My father was concerned by this, and he wanted it to be a more open conversation because it was obvious that I needed to have that. Yeah. But she was not in agreement with that. So they argued a lot about whether or not there should be a more open conversation about it. And the whole thing got odd enough that my little brother started to wonder if maybe he wasn't adopted too because of how strange it was handled. But, But even as, I'm thinking of this young girl, because at 11, even the fact that your adopted parents are arguing is your fault. Everything's your fault. It's all about you, because it is all about you, which is
and in that particular context, it was an argument that was existing purely because of you. They were disagreeing with something about me. Yes.
So and
I didn't like at all that they were arguing about any of that, but I did feel more validated that I had a parent that was acknowledging that I should be able to talk about these things and that it was not unreasonable for me to want to know absolutely anything at all about my origins, that was not unreasonable to want to know that.
And did your parents have details of your origins? Did they, or was it did they have kind of a rudimentary stuff, or did they have more than just the basics?
I don't think they really had anything beyond very, very basic things. I don't think that they were fibbing. I don't think they had it. Right. There were things that they did have that they said they didn't have, but for the most part, because I've seen the recordations since then, and a lot of the stuff wasn't even correct, and there were things missing, just they don't exist. They weren't ever written down. So I can't say that they knew it when it doesn't exist in record either. So,
but there's even the fact that there's a question mark is not good, is it? You know, even the fact that you have to ask. Even now, I can see you're thinking, "Oh, right, well, you're giving them the benefit of the doubt," and which is good.
There are things that I don't think that they knew, and then there are things that I do think that they knew, and they opted not to tell me.
Yeah, which is, if I can speak plainly, that's rubbish, isn't it?
But it is. It is. It is. There's no two ways around that. Yeah. There's just. If you only know these 5 things, you should tell me what these 5 things are. I should have the whole and unvarnished truth. If something with it had been inappropriate at 11, it was definitely not still inappropriate at 19 or 25 or 30 or, you know what I'm saying?
So on and so on, yeah.
Right, exactly. So.
Yeah, because we often describe it with my children, or I describe it as this idea of you're peeling an onion, in the sense that the truth is, you have the truth, but actually there's layers to that truth, and it's age-appropriate layers. So, you know, what a child understands at 6 isn't what they understand at 9 or 13 and 16.
Sure.
But it's the same knowledge. It's just a developed understanding of that. So, yeah.
Right.
So, right, you're 11, and that sounds like quite a tricky moment. And how did you? What were the stages after that? Because obviously you said you're okay now.
Right. There was some. I didn't necessarily want to die, but I didn't want to exist anymore either. I just kind of wanted everything to stop. At that point, I did go into therapy. Some of the therapy was not necessarily ideal. They have a lot more trauma-related therapy and more attuned adoption therapies in general now. Mm-hmm. But at the time, or possibly the therapist that was chosen, but I'm going to say at the time, because that sounds
it's generous.
I would prefer that it had just been the time of the life, and not just they handpicked terrible therapists. So I would like to think that it was
that's a horrible thought.
Just this is what was available at the time, is what I would like to think it was. But they definitely had an adoption is a wonderful gift, and so you should feel happy and grateful you were adopted, was the general theme of the adopted competent therapists. Which I was like, oh, okay. So I remember being like, I don't really feel like I agree with that. And that went on long enough that they diagnosed me with reactive attachment disorder. It's like, I don't think I have that either. I think I'm just really mad, justifiably angry at things that are going on. So
how old were you then? What age was that? Mm-hmm. How old were you then? What age was that?
I was diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder at the age of 13, and then went through serious cognitive therapies so that I could learn to understand how I needed to trust and believe that my mother loved me.
Wow. You've stopped me in my tracks.
Yep. It was unpleasant. It was unpleasant.
Wow. I mean, I guess in the UK, reactive attachment disorder is kind of the trump card of attachment disorders, isn't it?
It is.
That's it.
Yes.
That's the one. And I think in the UK, it's highly, highly irregular to get that diagnosis, because it is seen as catastrophic. Mm-hmm.
Right. Not that it can yet. I was not a violent or destructive person either.
But just that
beyond where I folded it in on myself, because it was the only place I could do it, I guess. But like I didn't do anything, so it seemed very excessive. But it was a lot of having to let them hug and touch me when I didn't want them to, and a lot of you have to trust her. She's good for you when she wasn't. There was it was not good.
Wow, that's kind of a misinterpretation. You could argue that's a clear misinterpretation of every teenager in the world who never wanted to be touched by their parent, which is quite a common phase, according to my teenagers. Sure. You know, I remember myself. Just please, no, you're my mum. Go away.
Right. I'm establishing a reasonably aged boundary where I don't want to be touched and coddled on like I'm 2. I feel like that's not unreasonable.
Yeah.
I have teenagers now, and if they're not feeling it, no means no, and that is perfectly fine, you know.
And that's a good lesson as well. You know, that's an appropriate lesson if you know boundaries, and that's
exactly.
Blimey, Charlie, you've given me there's some really interesting stuff, and not that you're book. Sorry, that sounded so patronising. How interesting. Just gobsmacking, really.
Well, it's kind of shocking because it's so over the top in a lot of ways, but it's what happened and it is what it is, which is why it's just kind of a matter of fact thing in the way that just good.
So
I don't necessarily have the most pleasant adoption story. I'm okay, but I don't necessarily have the most pleasant adoption story.
So you're not the cheerleader for adoption, then?
I am aware that it has a purpose, that it can't and won't ever actually go away. And I think that as long as adoption still exists, that the people that are doing the adopting should go into it with better intentions and direction than what I got. And so I will do what I can to make sure that no other adoptee grows up in a house similar to the one that I grew up in.
Yeah, that's
better for the next generation, whatever it is I have to do to make that happen. Yep.
So what do you do? I mean, well, I want to go back to because we're stuck at the 13, 14, 15-year-old who's kind of in therapy.
Okay.
Yes. But I will come back to that. So what is the journey out of that kind of quite a dark place for a teenage, adolescent young girl?
I mean, really it was, I did as much things as I could to be anywhere but home for as long as I could until I turned 18, and then I moved out. And that was what because then I was legally, nobody could stop me, and that's what I did. So that was the correct decision for me, too. So I think that trying to separate out, because even though there was all of that going on, she was very clingy. It was a very helicopter parenting kind, like I wasn't really allowed any space or privacy or quiet or freedom or really anything, really. So
sounds complicated.
She was possibly, it is by all standards, she was a narcissistic abuser with borderline personality disorder. They did a private, so it was a private gray market adoption specifically because she did not have to have a psych evaluation because they failed the one in the United States, which is how they ended up in Canada and didn't do one. So I think it's really good that you all do psychological evaluations before you adopt, because it's super important that those happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, the assessment process, I think even in the UK, it's quite prescribed and there's a standard format. I think that I'm a social worker, so I do assess people occasionally for adoption, but mostly for fostering. There's this idea of of kind of disguised non-compliance, that people will say what they have to say to get to where they want to be.
People will still absolutely do that. I still feel like, I don't think you should rely on those forms, but some people absolutely will because they know what the end result, with the coaching, a little bit of coaching maybe, to spit out the right answers to get to the end. They didn't ask them any of those questions for them to have even propagated a coached answer. There just wasn't one. Just how much you got in your bank account. Maybe that's not the way that should be.
But I mean, that's the history of adoption, isn't it? That it's even in, I've got I worked with a family who'd adopted in the UK in the early 80s, and basically all they needed was a letter from their priest. And the priest said, they come to church regularly and everything's fine. Lovely family. That's
lovely, good Christian people, if you will. Yep. That's all you need. Yeah.
And being a Christian is, well, it's no guarantee of anything at all, is it?
No.
Nothing
is guaranteed. Just much. It's just, that's a fact. Yeah. Much like a nice married couple may not still be nice and married 5 years later. Things happen.
Yeah. And I mean, you've opened up a whole kind of worms about because I meet a lot of adopters, and you think actually there's where the child's problem ends and where your problems start. We could argue that all day long, because that is a child of trauma, and maybe as an adoptive parent you're quite traumatized by this experience as well. So a really screwed up system that develops from families.
Oh, it absolutely does. And the overall, every place, regardless, that has adoptions that take place, it doesn't matter if it's in the United States or in Canada or the UK or anywhere else at all. It really doesn't matter. There may be some theoretical preparation for what comes after, but nobody is actually prepared for what happens after the adoption is finalized, and now this is now your life. There's no way to know, quote unquote, exactly what that's going to be like, but the lack of overall preparation for what could that mean in a lot of ways, I think, has been a big failure, and it impacts the adoptee, who will then react in the way that they react, whatever that means.
Yeah, as anyone would in that situation. It's not
exactly,
because I've started to kind of reframe behavior as strategies that actually often, when you think of the strategies in terms of that child's lived experience, that behavior, it's an appropriate strategy to manage that situation. It's not bad behavior, it's just a strategy for that child to keep themselves safe, or to whatever that is. Get them
however it is. And there is always that weird place where you think, well, if they're safe now, that would mean that would stop. No, maybe now they're just extra comfortable expressing, and they need to see where the not safe anymore line is. That's a defense. That's a protection mechanism in and of itself too.
Yeah.
At what point with you am I no longer safe because I need to know? That's a thing, and people kind of forget that that's a thing if you grew up somewhere that wasn't safe.
Yeah. So I'm kind of thinking about you now, and obviously you. Often I hear adoptees, and I do follow stuff online and see people often talk about this fog. Tell me about the fog. Is that do you have an experience of kind of being in the fog or coming out of the fog and that journey?
I mean, the fog, from my understanding, is that you're in kind of a thing where maybe you feel a certain way, or you feel safe almost in like an oblivion to what adoption is or what adoption may have done to you.
Yeah.
What did it mean in your life? I don't really feel like I was ever in a fog.
Right.
Because from a very early age, it was, we're not talking about that kind of, so I had maybe it's bad, okay. And so everything had already been running through the funnel of managing other people's emotions and feelings around myself, even as a child.
Yeah.
So by the time I was an adult, the only out of the fog, really, for lack of a better way of putting it, would be that I no longer lived there, so I was no longer under an obligation to not talk about it. I could now talk about it with whomever I wanted in whatever context I felt was appropriate for me to share my story, as opposed to before, when I wasn't allowed. That would be the closest thing for me. There wasn't a time where I woke up and went, oh no, adoption really kind of messed me up, and I missed all of this stuff, and I wish I had known this, and this, because I never knew it. And I always knew I didn't know it, and that always bothered me. So. Yeah.
So as you've kind of moved into your adulthood, was there a point where you kind of have started to look and try to find your origins, your family, your biological family, and all of, I don't know how you want to describe that, but was that? I did pursue that. Initially, I wanted kind of a general baseline of what was maybe like my ethnic makeup. Was I really born in this place in Canada? This kind of, I'd heard in the paper somewhere that maybe I was part Scottish. Was that true? Like, that was my initial, I think I would like to know. And then as my children had gotten older, they would ask questions about, like, who did they look like, and did they get any of it from me or my family? And I had to be like, maybe. Yeah.
Haven't met him, buddy. Kind of thing. So I did the DNA tests, and that popped with genetic relatives. And then using that information, it kind of proceeded on down. And I have since been in reunion with my father. I'm not in reunion with my mother, but I did find her. And then 3 older half-sisters, my younger sister, my younger half-sister, and my 2 younger half-brothers.
Wow.
Lots of siblings. Just lots of siblings.
So that's complicated, isn't it? That's a huge deal, because you kind of, in some ways, you're walking into a unknown land.
Yes.
Literally, on a geography, actually discovering the next thing and the next and the next. What is that like? How's that?
It was a lot.
Yeah.
it was a lot. Like and it was one of those. One day it was, because in my head I had obviously always known there was a possibility I could have siblings or half siblings. So, and then it became a very stark and clear reality. A very big reality, because one was found, and so by default they were all found kind of simultaneously. Yeah. So I went from none to all at once.
How'd you process that? I can't begin to imagine.
It was just a lot of so we're related. What do you do with people you're related to? I don't know what you do. It was a bit of that. But it turned out that we're all kind of very similar. Like, we have very similar personalities, and we all kind of look alike. And we all, things that some people maybe take a little bit for granted, that I was like, I can look at them and see why I look like this, which was not a thing I could do before then, because I didn't know what anybody looked like.
And I guess,
like, at all.
As someone who isn't adopted, that you don't even take it for granted. It's beyond that. It is just how life is. That I have that bit of that person. But for you, obviously, that's hugely significant. Right.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, so I know where the eyes, nose, mouth, hair, like, I know where all of this came from. Oh, I laugh like you laugh. Isn't that funny? Things like that that you just kind of didn't really think much of. But are kind of a big deal, because it made me feel more like I belonged somewhere, or there was, less like I was floating, kind of untethered and without any roots put down anywhere, because that's very much what it had felt like.
So that's quite a. But again, was that just so normal that you didn't necessarily realise until you were tethered what it was to be untethered?
Exactly. Didn't really think that. It was like, okay, I wanted to know, but was okay with the fact that I didn't. It's okay. I thought I had come to terms with that, if you will. Like, well, if I never find anybody, it's okay. If I don't really know that, it's okay. I never knew, and I can accept that that's what happened. Yeah. And then I found all of them and was like, no, nobody should accept that. Everyone should know. It was just kind of, because it turned out it was a lot more important than I thought it was.
Yeah. I mean, I
just didn't know.
Yeah. There's so much to kind of unpick in all of that. I mean, I'm conscious as well. I mean, the way we connected was through Twitter and social media, which is a wonderfully interesting place. It's a nice way of putting it. And so you kind of you share some of your you don't share necessarily your personal experiences, but you talk about broader experiences. So
I do.
And why is that? What drives your kind of your voice?
I try to keep it. It's all of it's always from my perspective, and how if I look at things and have picked them apart, what kind of spin have I put on it? So I always feel like you might relate to it, but I'm still only talking for me, and perhaps somebody who might feel similarly to me. I try to keep it vague or more open for a couple of reasons. One, because I don't like it when an adoptee shares their individual story and experience in this happened to me, and a lot of times it is discarded because, well, that was you personally had a bad experience, but overall adoption is this. So I speak about it in a very overall, a similarity I've noted in a lot of people is this, this, and this.
Yeah.
And perhaps I share some of these experiences, and perhaps I don't.
Yeah.
Some people connect with the personal part of a story, and then other people maybe disregard it as any more than an anecdotal thing they heard one time. So
yeah, do you think there is a danger though that we any one specific story, we can't base our whole perspective on that, can we? But we can. Mm-hmm. That's true for adopters as well. We're guilty of saying, "Yeah, but I'm different." How many times you don't know my story. I'm different. Yeah.
I'm so much different, but I'm over here, so it's completely different. Yeah. No, but feelings don't have a geographic border. Like, there isn't any, oh, you're in the UK? My bad. United States, feelings stop there. No, it's not. Somebody could feel feelings regardless of where they are in the world, and it could be the same feeling that I had. Even if you didn't necessarily do the same thing that, like, my adoptive mother did, doesn't mean that there isn't still that same kind of feeling, because I know I'm not the only adoptee that felt kind of untethered and lost, and like they just wanted calmness on their insides. Like, I know I'm not the only one that felt that way. They may have had a different reason for feeling that way, but that feeling is still the same feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are you trying to communicate to adoptees, to adopters then? What would you, if you could sit round us all up in a room, what would you say to us?
Well, I was rounding everybody up in a room together. I mean, I would then be overwhelmed because everybody's got an individual thing. I'd be like, I want to talk to each of you individually about what is individually happening with you. But let me talk in a broad way, and then you go, that sounds familiar, and then you can listen to that part more.
Pick out the stuff that's relevant.
Right, exactly. Because not everything is relevant to everyone. It's not. And the other thing I've tried to caution people on is, I've had these things happen and I felt this way. But you can't just assign that to your adoptee either. Yeah. Because then they may feel absolutely nothing like what I feel like ever in their whole entire life. And then if you insist that they do, they may resent you for it. And then, because you've told them how they feel, don't. Yeah. You can suggest if they're having trouble expressing themselves. I would say always try to figure out a way to suggest a comfortable, safe place that an adoptee can express what they're feeling, where they don't feel like they're going to be in trouble or bad or in an argument or cause you to fight with somebody else because they have feelings. Yeah. That they just need to be able to feel like it's okay to express what they are. And some of it you might not like to hear, and then some of it you might find makes your heart feel good on its insides. It can go both ways. It really can. I
mean, ultimately, I kind of think on a really fundamental level is every adoptee, no adoptee had a choice, every adopter had a choice. Mm-hmm. And I think that we, absolutely, as the people with that power and that autonomy and agency, that we've got a duty and a responsibility to be open to being wrong, or being open to being able to get better is maybe a nicer way, that we can do it better. That's a nicer way of putting it, isn't it?
Right. I mean, everybody will be wrong about something. That is human nature. There's no, we're all fallible in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. But if you get into a thing where you've just kind of encapsulated yourself in the idea of you have the best of intentions, so I'm just doing it with the best of intentions, so this doesn't apply to me because I'm not doing anything to be traumatic. That's not always the best either. Yeah. Because you've buffered yourself with a good intentions cloak, and intention doesn't always equal result.
Doesn't translate into good actions, does it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that history is rife with people going, "Yeah, it was a good idea," but
right.
Crusades.
I know what you were trying to do, but that's not what happened. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So that is really interesting. But it seems that that's quite a nuanced conversation, and 140 characters on Twitter or 280. No. It's just not going to happen, is it? And I see these.
No, that's a bit. That's a manifesto on its own. Yeah. And even then, it's probably still not covered everything. But I think the easiest way to note it is if as an adoptive parent, if they were thinking about those sorts of things, and they realized that all of the things they were thinking centered at an I, me, I. And at no point was it coming from we will call their adoptee Bob. Bob felt this way. if it's all I, me, and no Bob, then they've probably closed something off without meaning to.
Yeah, I think that's right, absolutely right. I think. Yeah, I think that adoptees, we may be guilty of going onto Twitter and thinking that our children will not see it or are not interested because they're 3. But Twitter is around to stay, isn't it? So that I know a lot of adoptees who find a lot of support on Twitter. So that, adopters that find a lot of support on Twitter, and they focus on...
They do also, yes.
They focus on... I think, I got that wrong, right? But a lot of adopters who go on, and I think they are focused on themselves because that's a place where they find therapeutic support, because there's... In the UK, the support for families is really grim, and the needs
of... The support for families everywhere, I think, is super grim, not just in the UK. It's...
that's reassuring in a horrible sort of way.
It's kind of horrifying, but you're not alone with that. After it's done, support is kind of non-existent. Enjoy your Google groups because nobody's coming. It's kind of... Yeah, that's It's true. All prepared for the doing it and nothing for the after.
Yeah.
Which is super unfortunate, because the after, not that the up to isn't important, but the after is actually super important, and there should be lots of support for the after.
There's a lot more after than there is before, isn't there?
Absolutely.
And so I think that often adopters then, if you're looking through a lens of adopters are potentially focused on their needs, if you look through that lens, then you will see almost universally adopters going on to Twitter to get their needs met.
Yes.
So that only reinforces the position. So it's just a mess.
Yeah, they'll go to get their needs met. I think part of the problem, and I think that parenting, it can be incredibly frustrating and it can be very isolating. And then if you were to add in having adopted, where it's still parenting and it's still a family, but it's still also different.
There's a lot of other stuff going on.
Right. So if you don't have anybody there that understands where you're coming from, you will, by human nature, try to seek out people that do. Because even if you just find one person to say, I know exactly what you're going through, even if they don't know exactly, but they feel like they do, and you've got kind of a thing that seems similar, then if nothing else, you feel better knowing that you're not the only person this has ever happened to. You're not completely all alone floating out there. And that can be very reassuring. But when it turns from I'm feeling these feelings into the let me overshare far too much information about my child and everything that they've done and or are doing, then it's very problematic. And I've noted that happens a lot.
Yeah, and that is really... Yeah, that's all kinds of tricky, isn't it? Because in some ways, people can choose what they want to do, but if we're sat watching, that can be awkward how to address that. Or if we're and again, it's Twitter, isn't it? So it's a nonsense. It's all froth in one regard.
Yeah, it is, and it's also if the people that have been like, and then they said things to me, and that's my private life. Like, you literally put it on the internet where everyone can see it. It's a public forum. It's not even a private group. It's a public forum. You can just be mindful that literally anybody can see the words you're saying. Is kind of where I think of it when it comes in terms of discussing kids.
Yeah. My children follow me on Twitter. Well, they're not. They think I'm the most uncool man in the world.
Sure.
Which
that's
is
their job because they are children.
It's just wholly appropriate. But I am conscious that the only time I ever put anything that's close to something that I think they might want to know about, I go and tell them. I say, I don't go and tell them. I go and say, I was going to say this. What do you think?
Right. It involves you. How do you feel about that? Right.
Yeah. But I often, so, but still, I'm conscious that as children, that their consent, that at 10, nothing's a bother, and at 13, everything's wrong.
Sure, that's fine, but and then 13, don't do any of that, and then at 30, they could be like, I cannot believe when I was 10, you were telling people that on the internet. Whatever the case may be. Yeah. And that's the thing that people should kind of also remember is maybe
this stuff
maybe it'll be gone by then and they'll never ever know. But if that's like what you're hoping for, then you should probably not be saying it either. If your theory is by the time they're old enough to know about it, it won't be there anymore.
Yeah.
So you don't want them to know then. Okay.
So when they're 13 and they get their phone and they kind of spend an hour going back through your tweets, going back 10 years, they might discover all kinds of things. But yeah,
right.
That's really interesting. So that makes sense of some of the. I think I do understand some of the adoptee concerns. Well, yeah, of course I do. I'm a human, It's obvious.
Sure.
I'm a functioning adult, apparently.
In some ways, it does cause people to have that very immediate kind of gut check, defensive. Yeah. I'm not a bad person. And okay, so. Yeah. But you're still doing this thing that's maybe unsightly, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Even if you're not, and if you're inherently not bad, and everything you're doing is supposed to be for the good, you should consider if what you're doing is the payoff, is the gain really worth it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like if their adoptee was grown, would they like their adoptee to go online and list out everything they did on the worst day their adoptee ever saw them have? Would they enjoy that?
Yeah, if the tables were turned, if there was a comparison Twitter account.
I don't think I'd like that. Then maybe don't.
Yeah, mommy dropped the F-bomb. Yeah, that's not a good look, is it? Yeah. Yeah. Not that. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, wow, yeah.
Although, if the worst your child has is mommy dropped the F-bomb, then you have done really well, and I applaud you.
Yeah, you're a fantastic mum. That's wonderful.
At that point, yeah. Good job.
Yeah. I'm aware I've taken up loads of your time, and you've been really generous in sharing a lot of your story, and some of that stuff is really quite raw. But I was just, and when you arranged to chat, was there anything that you were hoping I was going to ask you that you haven't had a chance to say? It's an open interview. What would
well, I think that, I appreciated that you were trying to be open to adoptees coming on and discussing things that we feel are like either important, relevant, or maybe overlooked from our perspectives. Because what is also very common is we're going to hear from an adoptee perspective is a lot of people think children, but we do actually grow up and turn into adults.
Yeah.
And as odd as that sounds for me to say out loud, it actually seems to be really surprising to people that the child they're raising right now could very well one day be me. Because they're going to get older and grow up. And so
yeah,
it's always very like, no, but mine's a child. You do know that children, even adopted ones, they get older every year. And eventually they're adults too. That's just how it works.
It's inevitable. Yeah.
It is. It's just, Lord willing and the creek don't rise, all the children grow up into adults. That's just how it works.
Yeah.
So I think that it's good for adoptive parents and adopters and foster carers really to recognize that the children that they're watching they do become adults. And sometimes I think they forget that. Like in the grand scope of focusing on the adoptee part of it, kind of forget the humanity behind it in a lot of ways.
Yeah. No, that's we've got to hold that in mind, haven't we? That our perspectives are passing, that these children will become adults, and we want those relationships to continue into adulthood. It's we've got a lot to learn. Increasingly.
Yeah. I mean, everybody does. That's the that's the thing.
Yeah, of course.
Everybody does, but everybody needs to be open to the idea of learning more, because nobody knows all of it. It's just not. The day you think you do, though, that's probably a bigger problem than acknowledging that you don't.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah. I think we've all been guilty of that at 20, haven't we? But now we get a bit older and a bit wiser.
I was under the impression that I was fully grown at 20.
Yeah.
I was incorrect, but I was.
Yeah.
Couldn't have told me that then.
Absolutely. Well, I'm gonna let you go and get on with your day. It's the middle of the afternoon there. It's nearly my bedtime now. It's dark and everything. It's what incredible.
Oh.
It's an incredible world we live in. It's very exciting.
Right? Yeah. Like we're gonna have like an early dinner in like an hour. So that's where we are.
Yeah, well, I'm almost past my bedtime. It's going to be
Uh-oh.
yeah. All the children are in bed and everything's cool. So, well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely.
And I would,
No problem.
and I'm sure people will be really interested to hear your perspective and have lots of questions.
Yeah, and I mean, if they have any questions, I can try to answer them to the best of my ability.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, we'll put your Twitter. I'll put your Twitter up. What's the name? The hashtag, not a hashtag, a name. Twitter handle.
My handle. Yep.
Oh, I'm so down with the kids. And we'll put your Twitter handle in the blurb, and then people, if they want to speak to you directly, they can do that.
Yep, they certainly can. I can't guarantee how quickly I will respond to everything, but I do try to keep my messages open. So if somebody did have a question, but they were concerned about public ridicule or sounding dumb or not coming across the right way, I try to keep my actual messenger message, like the inbox, open, where people can inbox me questions as well if they're
cool.
I don't think any question is a stupid question by any stretch of the imagination, but I do know how hard it can be to try to convey what your question is in such a brief little bloop. So if anybody had anything like that, they can certainly message me as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a lovely early dinner.
Thank you. And I hope you sleep well.
Thank you very much. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.